a few more items of business to cover, and then we're going to continue with the questions. Yes, I've been handed an email from Greg Lance Watkins, which is just quite short, and I'll just quickly read this out to you. It's in respect of a lady who's just received the MBE. Greg writes, "Hi, may I personally and very publicly congratulate Mona McNee, who I have met and corresponded with for at least 10 years, for her award of an MBE for her services to education by Her Majesty the Queen in the Birthday Honours List. Congratulations, Mona." Although Mona rightly received a much-deserved recognition for her services to education, particularly in the field of reading and writing, I do contend she equally deserved the award for her patriotic defence of these United Kingdoms in the field of Euro-realism. Well done, Mona. And he adds as a PS, sadly, it is not possible to congratulate Mona more personally by phone as she's profoundly deaf. And then he goes on, I suppose it is inevitable that I must accept teacher. With a rush of blood to her head in her well-earned glory, will be all too readily dashing to correct my spelling, grammar and syntax. In brackets he puts, I can keep her busy for years. So that's just a little accolade for Mona McNee. There is, I've been handed details of an event which is headed Conspiracy Presentation, Are You Ready for the Truth? This is taking place in Bournemouth, the Bournemouth International Hotel, Priory Road in Bournemouth, on Friday the 27th of June, next, if people can manage it, between 7 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. Brian Gerrish will be speaking on the hidden agenda behind common purpose and its threat to our liberty and freedoms. And John Whitterick, Corruption in Banking and Understanding the Imminent Global Financial Meltdown. I'm sure there's a lot of people very aware that with recession rising and what the Americans are doing with the dollar and the subprime crisis, contrived, no doubt, that they've been trying to bring about the collapse of the currencies for many, many years so they can bring in the cashless society, which of course is all about more and more control. So that's that one. Now, I have been asked, Albert has asked me if he can have a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes for Albert, who's going to update us on the was it Runnymede? Anyway, Runnymede project. Yes.
But firstly, you all heard me talk about this before. It's now been reported at about 20 police stations. It's not enough. I want 25% of police stations in every police force area in the country. So if anybody hasn't got a CD and the paperwork, come and see me afterwards and we'll sort you out if we can. The other thing is, of course, that there is a thing called the Runnymede project, which is a brand new thing. I went to the first meeting, in fact, along with Brian Gerrish, and it's a group of people who are active around the country who've decided that nothing is happening which is worth happening at the moment in the country, and decided to rectify that. Now, some of the things that they're proposing are that we should actually take Sheffield back from common purpose by everybody going up to Sheffield, postering the whole of Sheffield with information sheets on common purpose, and holding a major meeting up in Sheffield in order that they can, in fact, talk to the people of Sheffield about what's being done with their money by supplying common purpose with free office accommodation in order that they can undermine the democratically elected councillors. Another thing that's been done is they want to start constitutional discussion groups all over the country so that people are made aware of the constitution of this country, because not many people understand it very well. Certainly not if you've been educated in the last 35 years. Something else they're doing is they have tentatively booked the NEC at Birmingham. They want a meeting of 5,000 people from all over the place to go there in order that we can start things rolling all over the country to actively take the fight back to the government in order to get our country back. So these are things that Runnymede are doing. There's one bloke at Runnymede who's going around every time he sees a sign that's in metric, they go back and they visit it and they convert it to imperial measures. The local council sued them down at one of the seaside resorts, I believe, went to court. It turns out that it's illegal for local authorities to put up metric signs, and they've had to change all of their other signs at their own expense. so these are things which the Runnymede project is doing. So basically, if you're interested in the Runnymede project, come and have a chat with me afterwards before we go, and we'll see what we can do to get you on the mailing list for it. Thank you very much.
Could I just make a comment to Albert?
Just a moment, just wait for the mic.
Oh, right. Not really. Two things I've noticed vis-à-vis treason in the last week, Albert. Firstly, I gather the Law Commission, I got this from the Simon Heffer column in the Telegraph yesterday. It says the Law Commission has said it would like to see the end of the laws against treason, which it seems to think are messy. The other thing that I've noticed vis-à-vis treason was Peter Lilly's brilliant address in the House of Commons, which UK column have given fair attention to, and I haven't personally had time to read the whole of that article yet. But he majors significantly on the issue of treason. Now, treason clearly is coming near the top of the agenda of MPs' consciousness at the moment, which personally I would attribute as a huge compliment to the initiative that you commenced and have precipitated on this whole issue of treason. If they must clearly be very, very worried, and I would have thought well aware of what you and others are trying to do. And frankly, the Treason Act should offer a real nub of our ability to get these people. But anyway, I would have thought it's applauded to you for all that you work for.
I couldn't have done it without David's research. So I think David is the hero of the hour.
Well, thank you very much. I don't want this us to lose track of the mic. So if you've got any comments, if you can address them to me, then I can organise the mic for you.
Okay, that's fine.
Now,
just let Albert finish.
Yes.
Would you make a quick comment on that?
Just a moment, Albert. The mic's coming for you. No, you still need the mic.
If you don't want to be in the film. Basically, I'm aware of the fact that the government are trying to get rid of the treason laws. I've already written to Jack Straw because government repealed the 1790 and 95 Treason Act to 1796 Treason for Irish Women Act and Section 2 of the 1848 Treason Felony Act. I pointed out to Jack Straw that Parliament can pass any legislation they like in order to protect the sovereign and the constitution of this country. Having made them, they then cannot repeal them without weakening the protections to the sovereign and the constitution of this country. And if you take an act which is weakening the constitution's protection and the sovereign's protection, that in fact is by definition treason. So Parliament cannot in fact repeal any treason laws without committing treason. I'm still waiting for Jack Straw to reply, of course, but nevertheless, Parliament can do whatever they like. The treason laws are constitutional laws because they protect the Constitution, so by virtue of that they are a constitutional set of laws, and constitutional laws cannot be repealed or amended by ordinary statute legislation. That is a major tenet of our constitutional law, and anything that they do to repeal these laws will in fact be a statute law which can't repeal them anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. We're going to continue now with the question and answer session with Ashley. And so there were one or two people who wished to ask questions before the break, so perhaps if we can pick up on those and continue from there. Fern at the front here.
I've just been hearing about a group of people who are going to actively do something, but I kind of like your opinion on this, but to me it seems every time we get, as we've already said, a no vote for the treaty, everybody gives a sigh relief, sits down and says, oh good, that's all right then. Have you got any words for us, because this is going out on the internet, there's going to be a lot of people watching this, just to keep people in a fighting mood?
Well, the brutal truth is the fight is not yet over and not yet won. Therefore, we have to keep the battle going. But like all wars, there are swings and balances of success and partial success and, dare I say it, failure on both sides. This is a long, long battle. The European Union in particular is a 1930s solution to 1950s problems. If we were starting again today, given the kind of world in which we now live, there is no way we would invent the European Union. Absolutely no way. It doesn't address or begin to provide the means by which we should be dealing with today's issues and today's world. Now, there is a very negative aspect to this, which is all to do with the fact that we belong to a club in which we are uncomfortable neighbours with everybody else. The British don't belong in the European Union. We should never have joined. And the sooner we leave, the better. If that's the way they want to run their affairs, fine. I don't have a problem with that. But it's not for us, and it doesn't fit our concept of democratic, accountable government. And fundamentally, we in this country elect a government to act in our best interests, knowing that after 5 years we can throw the rascals out. We can elect another group of MPs who form another government, and they have an absolute right to change every law that's their predecessors have ever produced, subject to some minor qualifications. But essentially, we elect them and they answer to us. There is nowhere in Europe that is quite the same. Every other country in Europe, bar possibly the Danes, and I don't know enough about their constitutional relationships to be able to speak firmly about it, but essentially most European continental countries, the state exists in its own right and the people answer to it. And that's one of the problems with the Lisbon Treaty and the treaties that have preceded it. They are they are based on an assumption that the state exists in its own right and we answer to it. Not true of the Brits. Now, we just have to keep the battle going. One of the difficulties we have, one of the many difficulties we have, is a lack of resources. And one of the other many difficulties we have is, and this was mentioned earlier, the fact that we have a number of disparate activities all going on in parallel, and there is a reluctance, an extraordinary reluctance for these groups to work effectively together. I think that's both a good and a bad thing. First of all, it's a good thing from the point of view that it means our enemies don't know where we're coming from next, because we are so dispersed and we do have so many angles of attack. And that's a good thing. But on the other hand, as one of the senior bureaucrats in Brussels said to me only last month, would you believe, and he volunteered this in a corridor, I passed him, and he stopped me and said, "Can I have a word?" And I thought he was going to give me some bureaucratic earful for something I'd either done or not done, which he disagreed with. And instead he said, if you and your colleagues got together, if you and your colleagues really got stuck in to what we are doing here, you could make life very hard for us. And this is a bureaucrat telling me, an extraordinary thing to say. But depressingly, not only is he right, but he's right in the criticism as well. There are times when in Brussels when I feel I'm fighting as a one-man band. I have to say that some of my colleagues elected on the same ticket do not get involved. And their argument is that it's nothing to do with us, that we should leave them all to it. But if you get through the enemy gates, as I've done, and you're like a guerrilla inside the camp, and there are weapons lying around everywhere to be picked up and used to destroy the enemy with their own weapons, why not? That is why I sit on these committees and I go to them and I ask questions, and I'm, if you'll pardon the bluntness, bloody difficult. I ask questions in writing. I ask hundreds of questions in writing. Robert Kilroy-Silk has asked over 1,100. Between us, we've asked nearly 1,500. In fact, it's probably over 1,500 now, in 4 years. Between us, we've probably asked more than every other member of the European Parliament put together. No, that's not quite true. Last I looked, it was about 80, I think, in 4 years. They don't use the weapons that are there, lying around to be used. If you go onto my website, you'll see the questions I've asked, and many of them are not intended to gather information and answers. They're to undermine confidence. They're to absorb time. They're to make the Commission and the bureaucrats think about what they're doing and the consequences of what they're doing. There are often cases where I don't care what the answer is. What matters is asking the question in the first place. And I could be surrounded by another 50 or 100 people doing the same if they took their minds to it. And we're not just talking about Brits. One of the things we constantly forget in this country is that we are not alone. There are significant numbers of people in Italy, in Denmark, in Estonia, in Latvia, in various parts of the other 26 states where there is solid opposition. There are times when there might be a vote in Parliament about something absolutely crucial, fundamental, matter of principle, and I can guarantee you there will always be about 80 votes against. And those 80 votes, more or less, are the same people, time after time after time. But I have to freely admit, we don't work together. A lot of them will come from the communist left. A lot of them will come from what is loosely known as the far right. Others will come from all over the parliamentary spectrum. But we never, as a group of 80 people, sit down and say, how can we deal with this mega organisation, which is so difficult to get to grips with? So the criticism is a fair one.
Sorry, could you hang on a moment? If this is a question, then you must wait for the mic, please.
Yeah, I'm just saying. When you leave the Parliament next year, which you will have to go up to, then who will be asking the questions then? And you'll also be out as well, won't you?
We all have to seek re-election if we wish to stand again. And the election is, I think it's the 4th of June 2009. So it's virtually a year. I think it's the 4th, but it's certainly early June. I'm reviewing my position.
Right, we've got a question just here.
Yeah, coming back to what we discussed MEP's expenses, etc. But more importantly, it was the bank accounts and the overseas bank accounts, the practices, the secret or signatures of people just apply to receive money that they don't have to account for, possibly even care about the situation. I know we discussed it before, but touch on it again.
You're referring to the 3,000 secret committees, which I and one or two other MEPs finally prized out of the Commission a while ago. There are 3,000 secret committees that advise the Commission on its policies, and they have been in existence for some considerable time. It was a matter of deduction that we discovered they existed. It suddenly occurred to me and others that how possibly could bureaucrats know so much, to get into so much detail on the minutiae of all the things on which they were legislating. They couldn't possibly know that much and get the detail right, or what they perceived as right. And finally they admitted there were 3,000 committees advising them on an ad hoc basis. They're made up of experts, academics, consultants. There is not a single MEP sits on any of them. We don't know anything beyond what they are called, what each one is called. We don't know who the members are. We don't know what their agendas are. We don't know how much money they have at their disposal. We have no idea what powers they have within the Commission system itself. And above all, we cannot sack them. That is the reality of the way the bureaucracy works, ostensibly to produce laws in your interests. So that's the first thing. You mentioned bank accounts. Again, this came out of a series of questions to the Commission. They have 663 bank accounts all over the world, and many of them are escrow accounts on which the signatories are other people. In other words, if there is a funding going on of a particular project, monies are paid into an account which is then drawn out by people whose signatures are not drawn on people within the Commission itself. The money is passed over and then is drawn out by third parties. And that is a situation which has been going on and still goes on around the world, particularly concerning things like so-called humanitarian aid, much of which never gets to the people for whom it's intended. And there is something new which I have just put on, or I'm in the process of putting on my website as we speak. I've commissioned, with some of the money that I have at my disposal, I commissioned a report on the activities of what are known as NGOs, non-government organizations. And we have unearthed the fact that in the last 2 years, that's 2005 to 7, the European Union has paid over 50 million euros to a group of NGOs, including, wait for it, the European Network Against Racism got 2 million. The European movement itself got 2.5 million. The Search for Common Ground, which might have some connection with Common Purpose, I don't know, nearly 3 million. The European Youth Forum, 3 and a bit million. Citizens Action Service, whatever that is, 3.3 million. And there's another one here about, oh yes, the International Lesbian and Gay Association, 1.5 million euros of your money. It's appalling. In addition to that, Oxfam and various charities linked to Oxfam received over that same 2-year period just under £100 million. Now, I'm not saying that wasn't all spent in good causes at all. All I'm saying is that that is the fact. But some of these organisations are quite clearly distributing public funds to third parties whose primary job, self-appointed job I might add, is to go back to the EU to persuade them to do things they probably intended to do in the first place. So it's a kind of self-fulfilling process in which our money plays part of the liquidity that makes it all happen.
Over here, Dave Barnby.
Getting back to the treaty, how important is the Lisbon Treaty, or was the Lisbon Treaty to the EU in the stability of the Eurozone and the Euro and the continuation thereof, do you think?
Well, the Eurozone issue is a vexed one, particularly right now. I think I referred to the fact the Lisbon Treaty includes the words that the European Union shall be, the currency of the European Union shall be the euro. I've asked, again, one of my many questions, I've asked about whether the the UK's opt-out still stands. And I got a fairly evasive answer suggesting that yes, maybe it does, but it wasn't exactly categoric, to say the least. I think they hope, expect that sooner or later a British government will cave in and join the euro. Now, in the meantime, of course, we've got some really serious splits in the attitudes towards the euro and also the effects of the euro on local economies. You don't need me to say it again, but it is self-evidently the case that you cannot have a one-size-fits-all policy on interest rates when you've got such disparate economies in different parts of their economic cycle. And if you've ever studied economic theory, you will know that it is absolutely crucial that all economic cycles are not the same. Precisely because once one group or individual countries or one country large enough like the United States or Japan is in a recession, it is very important that other economies elsewhere are buoyant, and they help the process of reviving that part of the economy, world economy, which is not doing so well. And then on another occasion, the process will be in reverse. The European Union's economy might be doing quite well, and other parts of the world may need our help. That is the sort of diversity of economic cycles that you actually need. So the idea that you try and lump the whole of Western Europe to become one economy functioning in the same way and at the same phase in the economic cycle is an extremely dangerous idea. And of course there's no cultural connection between the economy of let's say Eastern Europe and that of Great Britain. There is no similarity between the economy of Spain and the economy of Estonia. You've got the Irish with raging inflation, or they've had raging inflation, who need a higher interest rate to try and control prices. Likewise, in Germany, you had high unemployment for a long period of time, and if anything, they needed lower interest rates and couldn't get them. So we've got a series of broken concepts of the euro as an efficient currency. There are parts of Italy where it is loathed, there are parts of Germany where it is loathed, there are parts of Spain where it is loathed. There are other parts of the European Union, and dare I say it, I have to include Ireland, where membership of the EU from a point of view of economics, apart from inflation, has been a fantastic success. But you will only get problems if you try and force everybody into some kind of an economic corset which doesn't fit them all.
Thank you.
How does the, you didn't quite answer the question fully. As I put the question because I understood that one of the reasons for the Lisbon Treaty, apart from grabbing more power, was to enable the European Union to introduce measures such that these asymmetric forces could be controlled through various directives and things so that the euro would work. Otherwise, there's the risk of the whole euro system falling apart. Could you elaborate on that second one?
Well, I thought that was really what I tried to convey, that it's not possible. Yes, that's what they wanted, and if you recall, when I was talking earlier, I did talk about the fact that they have got reserve powers which would enable them to take over taxation policy and taxation collection and so on. That's all part of financial management. But my point is that you can't do that, and you can't, I don't think those powers, whether they're used or not, even if they were used, would make any real practical difference in the activities of the respective economies of the different countries involved, because they are all so different.
In the United States, they succeed to a large extent in having a dollar zone which works because they have control of the movements, financial movements between different parts of the country.
Yes, but in the United States, you've got one culture, one language, one way of doing business. You've got companies all over the country that are represented everywhere and function in the same way everywhere. And you also have genuine movement of labour within one country. We have now, the European Union would now argue, yes, we've got movement of labour as well, but it's not the same sort of movement of labour. It's economic migration on a mass scale, which is totally different.
Further to that point was, if you picked up in the Telegraph this week, that the German banks are starting to not accept any other euros than their own. Their own euros are differentiated by the consumer number starts with an X.
Yeah. Well, there is a real problem with forgeries, and there is a real problem with the use of 500 euro notes. And they're all to do with money laundering and fraud and the like. I asked a question a long time ago of Mr. Trichet, the chairman of the central bank, president of the central bank, about the persistent printing of 500 euro notes. And I understand, I don't know, but I'm told that the notes are in fact, if you've got the right paper and the right equipment, quite easy to forge. But 500 euro notes, you're never going to go into a newsagent and buy an ice cream with a 500 euro note. But if you're trying to move large quantities of cash assets from one country to another, you buy yourself a briefcase and stuff it full of 500 euro notes, and suddenly you've got a lot of money, which nobody's going to interrogate you about when you walk across the border, because the Schengen Agreement allows you to do that. They are only used by people who have nefarious purposes, by and large. I'm not saying none are ever used properly, but it is an extraordinarily large unit of currency to have contained in a piece of paper the size of a postcard. And it is ultimately just a piece of paper with printing on it. So I think that's one of the problems that the euro has created for itself. It's poorly designed, it's easy to forge, And because it's printed in these large denominations, it is capable of fueling corruption simply because it exists.
Right, we have another question over here from Peter.
Yes, Ashley, I heard your comment earlier on vis-à-vis expense claims by MEPs, and you gave some very interesting information there on how they're made up. And from what you said, I suspect that the Daily Mail article may have gone a little far in pursuing the message they were trying to get across, because within that figure of £350,000 a year that they stated were expenses, I think maybe their salary was included within that. And clearly there are one or two other items that would be probably classed as legitimate claims, and certainly the same payments are made to domestic politicians. But personally, you went on to say that you felt that you would prefer that the media spent a bit more time on concentrating on some of the other major issues. And I would agree with that to a very large extent. But personally, this issue cropped up at a dinner at the Freedom Association a few months ago, and it was just after some of the revelations of the expense fiddles of MPs came out. And I put the point to the editor of Freedom Today, the Freedom Association magazine, that with their good offices, I wondered if they could consider pursuing this element of expense fiddles by MEPs, because personally I feel it may lie at the root of an awful lot of the phenomenon that we see. In that, and one final point there before I pull in the thread, I saw somewhere else that the comment on somebody on the expense account regime in Europe was that it seemed to them that the expense regime had been designed to encourage unethical claims. And it was so deep and nefarious that it was very difficult to comprehend what the system was. But my point to the editor of the Freedom Today magazine was, if MPs know they are on a cushy number, an absolute dream for most people, where all they had to do was be there, and we've learned from you the extent of the power of MEPs, which is next to nothing, other than those with gumption like yourself who ask the questions. But if they know they're in a paradise, a money-making paradise, they're much more likely to keep quiet and not to address the deep issues. And least of all, they're likely to want to see the demise of the EU like a hole in the head, i.e. the longer it goes on, the longer they've got this cushy number. So I think if the treatment of expenses has got to be handled fairly, but I think it may lie at the root of all of the plastering over of the foibles and outrages that we know goes on. So the more information that's given, both for Europe and Westminster, the better, because we'll then get MPs who really are keen on doing their job for the country.
Well, a couple of points about that. First of all, the European Union and the Soviet Union have one big difference. The Soviet Union used to slaughter its opponents, and the EU tends to buy them. And that's not entirely a joke. Well, that's the situation at the moment. I think there is an element of truth in what you say, in that it is intended to be an extremely generous series of allowances, There is nothing obligatory on MEPs to use the money for the purposes intended. There's very little checking in that sense. I mean, clearly it's checked as to where the money goes, but there's no sanctions about the use of that money if people choose to pay their wives or children or whatever else it may be. That seems to be acceptable. And of course, in a lot of continental countries, that kind of low-grade corruption, if I can call it that, is the norm. They don't regard it as exceptional at all. They wonder why we make such a fuss about it. We have, in effect, imported a lot of the corruption that they are used to and now find it in our society as well. And that is a terribly disadvantageous thing that's happened to us because of our membership. The other thing I'd just point out is that there is, or there has been wide publicity to the fact that after the next election, the expenses system will change. But I can tell you now, for certain, that it will cost taxpayers more. And this is why. At the moment, if I go to Brussels or Strasbourg, I get paid a fixed sum, regardless of what it costs me, actually. Whether I go by train or by plane, whatever level of ticket I buy, however many taxes I get on the way there, at the end of the day, I get a fixed sum based on mileage. Now, after the next election, that will change. After the next election, I have to produce documents to show what I have spent, assuming I was still there. So what's going to happen? Everybody's going to fly first class. They're all going to get taxis from their home to the furthest airport, wherever they want to go. It is going to cost a fortune. We are not any better off. You may not like the system, and it has got its definitely corrupt elements to it, but at least it defined the expense. And I'm not defending it when I say that, not at all. What I am saying is that if you change the system to actual expense, there is now no incentive for anybody to do anything except travel first class everywhere. And that is what they're going to do. Furthermore, I went to see the accounts department and I asked them, what is going to happen to you when this starts to happen? And they said, we're going to be deluged with paper. We're going to be buried in it. So we're going to have more staff to cope with the system. Now, you may not like what I'm saying, but I'm telling you that is what's going to happen, and it's absurd, and it's going to be more expensive even than the corrupt system we have at the moment.
You say the change is going to be based on what they actually spend?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Well, can't they say you are entitled to second class travel by train or plane, and we'll pay that no more?
But that's exactly what they've been saying. That's exactly what they've been saying for the last umpteen years. And people have found ways, because air travel in particular has come down so much. People have found ways of saving quite a lot of money by travelling with these low-cost airlines. And in a sense, can you blame them? It is a significant sum of public money, and therefore it is important. But the fact of the matter is that what we're going to see next time around is an even higher expense because of the change of the system.
Before we go on to the next question, which is over here with Dr. Lister, I'd just like to make an observation which I've been aware of over the years, and there's a fundamental difference between the British way of life and the way that the continentals can conduct their affairs. They have, for centuries, been in an environment where the powers that be, whether it's the government of the day or the Roman Catholic Church, says, don't do what we do, do as we say, and therefore people have had to live with the rather corrupt double dealings of their lords and masters, and have become very adept at working the system. Now, in the UK, I mean, we had the break with Rome. We've had great revivals and this type of thing, where the Bible has become a very important cornerstone of the law and the basis of the governance of this country. Consequently, the British tend to be law-abiding. And the fundamental difference between the British and the Continentals is that we're fundamentally law-abiding and they are fundamentally much less so. So consequently, when the EU regulations and laws and directives are imposed on us, quite apart from the fact that our civil service gold plates them, or has a tendency to do that, that we tend to obey them, and we don't have anything like the ways and means of getting round them that the Continentals do. And I think, in consequence, the way that the European Union works hurts us even more than it hurts the various nations of Europe. So I don't know if you care to comment on that.
Well, I broadly agree with you. I think there is a cultural gulf between this country and the rest of the European Union, which has made us, as I've said before, something of a square peg in a round hole. We do not belong. It is not part of our way of thinking to conduct our public affairs in this manner. It's as simple and as basic as that.
I think if we have a couple more questions, and then perhaps we should be looking to conclude the meeting. There's one from Dr. Lister, and then yes, yourself. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a good deal about what I might call the financial affairs that apply to members of the European Union. But it seems to me this is likely to be small beer compared with many of the other routes by which money goes astray, shall we say, within the confines of the EU. And I wonder whether you would like to comment on that.
Well, we're back to something which is called shared management. One or two of you heard me talk about this before. Shared management, in a nutshell, means we, the European Union, decide, and you, the member states, enforce the consequences on yourselves. And that applies equally to the management of public funds. We, the European Union, will give you N millions of pounds to spend on this, that and the other thing, and you, the member state, will ensure that that is what it is spent on, and you will account for it back to us. And the connection between the two probably disappears somewhere halfway between us. You don't use the money correctly, you don't account for it correctly, you don't provide audited accounts back to us necessarily. If we send auditors to check on what you're doing, they're given the runaround. Nobody quite knows where all the money went. What was supposed to have been done with it hasn't happened yet, or it's in the process of happening, or it'll happen tomorrow, and on it goes. I mean, it depends, I'm generalizing, and that's dangerous. It very much depends on what precisely you're talking about. I'll give you one concrete example, and it is concrete. There is a bridge which has on it a large sign saying built with European Union money. And at the moment it goes across a bridge between the European Union and Serbia, and on the other side there is nothing but fields and crops, because the Serbians haven't built the road which follows on beyond it. In other words, it's a total waste of money. I was talking to a Portuguese lady who lives in this country now, and Portugal joined some years ago, as you know, and she was telling me that there are motorways and highways and new bridges and a fantastic infrastructure in Portugal, all paid for by public money before they joined, to encourage them to vote yes, they should join. And now the tolls on those roads are so high, nobody uses them. And everybody drives around on the ordinary roads they always used before. Now, okay, that's not necessarily a corrupt use of money, It is most certainly the inefficient use of money. And I think the most vivid example is the one I've already referred to twice today, I think, and that is the use of the Common Agricultural Policy to pay for olive groves that grow in the Aegean Sea.
Can one find anywhere, is there any written evidence of where money is spent? Because the question is so wide and there are so many avenues that it will be interesting to know in more precise form just what EU spending is.
Yeah. Oh, there is. Every year there is a document, several inches thick, which is the annual accounts. And the Court of Auditors is supposed to sign them off as being a true and correct record, and never has, for the reasons I've explained earlier. And it's all there. And every year the Parliament, which is nothing more than an elaborate, expensive charade, because we have no power to legislate, all we can do is approve what's already been decided. We can effect to a degree certain amendments, but that's about all. We can't repeal anything either. But every year we have a vote on the budget for the following year, all constructed by the Commission, and there will be a number of block votes, just to give you one example of how corrupt this system is. And regularly there is a series of block votes on things like management costs, operating costs. And you look at some of the individual items within those block votes, and they'll talk about translation services, computer services, maintenance, building repairs, and so on and so on. And then at the bottom there'll be an item, other expenditure, and it'll be 100 million or some vast sum. I mean, I'm making that bit up, but it is a substantial sum. And nobody knows what it's for. And nobody will answer the question, what precisely is it for? It's there as a kind of reserve, but you can be sure it'll all disappear before the end of the year. And of course, nobody's going to vote against translation services. Nobody's going to vote against building repairs or secretarial services or whatever. So it goes through, because to vote against other expenditure, which is unspecified with this vast sum of money beside it, means you've got to vote against all the others as well. And that is the way they do business. It is corrupt, in a word, corrupt.
Thank you, Ashley. We've got a question here, and then I'd like to give Albert the last word after that.
Ashley, your excellent questions to the EU, prodding them along, would you be able to, and if you could, would it not assist your cause if copies of those went to some of the national newspapers? And the second thing, if I might ask you, is it quite impossible for the EU MEPs, could they not take control and run the affair? Because effectively most European governments are run, I think, by the MPs. Why can't you wrest control from these few faceless Brussels bureaucrats?
Well, to answer the second question first, the way the European Union is constructed, we are there to give an illusion of accountable democracy. We are not there to be a part of the executive. In our country, we elect a parliament, and within that parliament, an executive emerges called the cabinet and the government of the day. It doesn't happen like that. The executive is the commission. We are there to approve or comment on what they have decided to do. That's all we can do. That is the way it is. That is why the whole thing is a sham. I am one of the most highly paid monkeys pressing buttons for bananas every month you will ever see, because that's all I'm entitled to do. Every month, for 4 days, we sit there and we press buttons during the voting session, probably for an hour before lunch, and because the French take lunch very seriously, it has to be over by 1 o'clock. And at the end of the day, we get paid. And if we're not there to press those buttons, we don't get paid. So we really are monkeys pressing buttons for bananas. And you should abolish us. Sorry, what was your first question?
I think we understand that, but can you not collectively wrest power, legally or not legally, from them?
Well, not legally we can't.
I don't understand why you can't.
But they like it. Most of them like it. I'm one of a minority who think it's not right and it needs to be fundamentally changed, or better still, we should leave. They like it like that. They get paid. They enjoy it. It's easy. Some of them contribute. A huge percentage don't even do that. I am one of a minority in that I am actively involved on the committees on which I sit. I actively engage with the Commission, and I make myself a confounded nuisance on behalf of the people who elected me to do that job. But I am one of a minority.
My second question was to assist you in making yourself a nuisance. Could
Oh,
you,
yes, yes.
Could you, if you wish, send some of your questions to national newspapers at or soon after the same time?
We do. We send a huge amount of material to the media. I know a lot of the journalists in Brussels. I know some of the journalists here. I regularly feed them with information. When did you last see my name in the newspaper? Not that it matters to me personally. So that is why I run a website which is heavily visited, I'm glad to say, by people who do want to know what's going on. That is the only medium available to me. I am persona non grata on the BBC, unless they want someone to talk about history of English cricket, because I'm on a list of, in the sports department, of people who've written books about cricket. But when it comes to politics, deadly silence. I am persona non grata, and the same applies to most of the written media as well. They don't want to know.
Right. Thank you. Just a moment. Wait for the microphone. I was going to give the last question to Albert, because we're beginning to run over time.
I just want to ask.
Right, you have a quick question?
Just a quick question, actually. When you have to vote, I know it's a case of hands up and down very, very quickly, but you also do have a press button system, don't you? Well, what happens when you press buttons and say no to something? What happens then? Or don't people ever say no?
Well, they do. The question is not about what I do, it's about what the total of 700 and odd MEPs do together. If 80 of us vote no and 710 vote yes, then the answer is yes. And likewise, the press button system is only used in certain circumstances. Most of the time, it's wave your arms in the air. But you see, what actually happens is that the President of the Parliament knows that the Tories, the right wing, centre-right, and the Socialists have agreed something. So he'll say, Amendment 57, those in favour, those against, abstentions, passed. And he'll say it as quick as that, because he knows that the centre-right and the Socialists have both agreed to vote for. And they don't even have time to put their hands up. That's the way it works in practice.
Yes, just on this voting system, you say you can abstain, as presumably by not pressing the red or green button, is that correct?
Yes, there's a white one, which is abstention.
Okay. So to get paid at the end of the day, your allowances, you have to press one of those three buttons at least once.
No, you have to press it more than 50% of the number of votes that day plus one.
Last question with Albert.
Yeah, you've touched, Lincoln, on the difference between the constitutions in Europe and the Constitution of the United Kingdom. Can I ask briefly, how many people in this room would be interested in having a meeting where we actually discuss our Constitution, its history, how it came into being, and exactly how important it has been and still can be to this country and its freedoms?
you want John Bingley here.
Then can I suggest that we organise a meeting to do that?
In which case I suggest you invite John Bingley to come and address it. He is regarded by a number of lawyers as probably the professor of English constitutional law right now, and he's written more about it than almost anybody.
Right. We could go on, but we've reached the end of our meeting, and Harry would like just to say a few words. And I know he's got something in his hand, so I'll just pass you over to Harry, and after that we'll close the meeting.
Okay. I'm about to make the best and shortest speech of the afternoon in thanking Ashley, who is, as we know, the hardest working of all the MPs, to spare time for us. We may be a small congregation today, but obviously from the questions asked, we are the most intelligent possible. Thank you. Dear Ashley.
Oh, how kind. How very kind.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming, and I'm sure that you'll be most welcome to talk among yourselves as we disperse, and do feel free to grab as many of these editions of the UK column as you feel that you can usefully distribute. There's another pile on the table there, and I'd be awfully glad if they were all taken and distributed. I do have more. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And many thanks, Ashley, for coming. It's been tremendous. Thank you.